This week, we're going to be talking about the process by which living things turn the substances that they consume into actual energy. So, for instance, these are my dogs. Railteen is the black one, Tatty is the white one, and frequently I find myself wondering where they get that boundless energy from. Of course, as I started filming, they stopped running around the yard like absolute hooligans, but in general, they seem to be boundless fonts of energy for running around, wrestling, making all sorts of mischief. But how do we actually, on a molecular level, how do we actually get from the food we eat and the air we breathe to the actual energy that powers life? And what is the energy that powers life anyways, even? So this week, we're going to be talking all about the process of respiration, which usually when we say that word, we mean the process of breathing air. But in this case, we're also talking about the cellular process by which we turn oxygen, that's the link with respiration as the word you probably are more familiar with, into the energy we need to do to use for all sorts of, apparently, roughhousing. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the process of energy flow. This week, we'll be focusing on, as I said, the processes of cellular respiration. These are common in all living things. Next week, we will specifically get into plants and talk about the processes of photosynthesis. But first, let's review some basic concepts of metabolism and what energy is in a biological context. Metabolism is simply a word that describes the chemical reactions going on within living things. These processes ultimately all derive their energy from an outside source, usually the sun. Energy then, in these systems, cycles around changing forms and ultimately is lost as heat back to the environment. However, the processes by which this energy circulates are really important and variable. Here we have a little bit of a simplified diagram of energy flow through an environment. We have light energy from the sun coming down and being utilized by the plant to create glucose. This then is used by the animals as consumers, and then in turn, both the plants and the animals are returned to the environment and used as food sources for detritivores, such as our little roly-poly friend there. Along the way, a certain amount of the energy is always lost to heat, because these processes aren't 100% efficient. Metabolic processes can be summed up in a couple of different ways. One way is by thinking about what direction energy is taking in the system and whether things are becoming more or less complex. For instance, catabolic pathways break down large molecules into smaller pieces, releasing energy. When your body digests a plate of pasta and turns all that starch and other carbohydrates into smaller sugar molecules, that is a catabolic reaction. These are really important, obviously, as a lot of what we take in is in these large forms that we can't use directly. However, this can't be the only way that chemical reactions proceed in the body, because we ourselves are the result of a lot of little things being built up into larger things. This leads us to anabolic pathways. These create large molecules from small pieces using some sort of energy input to run the reaction. Now, what actually happens a lot in living things is that where energy comes from to power these anabolic reactions is actually coming from the catabolic reactions. Here we can see a little bit of a simplified graphic where the energy produced by breaking apart certain large molecules is then used to power the reactions that synthesize other large molecules. The chemical ways by which this happens are complex, but we'll start to dig into that as we go through the next couple of chapters. Energy isn't just floating around the cell, at least not in any sort of long-term capacity. And when we're talking about chemical reactions, long-term is in itself pretty short, even. So if the cell's gonna make energy and move it to the different parts and different reactions that need energy input, how is it gonna do this? Well, in this unit, you're gonna be hearing a lot about a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is made up of an adenine molecule, which is a nitrogenous base, similar to what is in your DNA, a ribose sugar, and then 3 phosphate groups. Now, this may seem not particularly remarkable in and of itself, but because of the way ATP is structured, that final phosphate can be added and subtracted through other chemical reactions. So, in addition to hearing about ATP a lot, you'll also be hearing about ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And in fact, the conversion between ADP to ATP and then back again is the actual mechanism by which energy is created or stored, more accurately, and then used to power all sorts of different reactions in the cell. Think back to our diagram that we just saw. Some reactions will remove the final phosphate from ATP, allowing the energy stored within and released by breaking that bond to be used in other reactions. In other processes, ADP gets basically recharged by using chemical reactions to add on that phosphate. This is the main engine that drives the complex biochemical reactions in our cells. In this video, we've gone over some of the basics of metabolism, and we've introduced you to ATP, the molecule that is at the core of energy storage and use within most biochemical systems. In the next couple of videos, we'll dive into how we actually produce ATP, that recharging of ADP by adding on the phosphate that we discussed earlier, and how we get from the external chemicals that we take in to actually using this within our biological systems.